Then, folks. So good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Trammell. I'm the Director of Export Development at Opportunities New Brunswick. I'm delighted to be joined by colleagues Yulia Demish and Deanne Duchesneau, who form part of a capacity building committee that was struck across Atlantic Canada, designed to support the exporting growth potential of Atlantic Canadian exporters. And thanks to a partnership among provinces and the federal government in the region, we have the Atlantic Trade and Investment Growth Strategy as a framework, and under which we've developed training programs over the past few years. And this afternoon's training program is called Export Growth in a Virtual World, a step-by-step guide. And we're very pleased that we're able to bring this training program to you as a result of months of work, research, and intelligence gathering over the past probably 8 months to define this new way of doing business that we're coining virtual trade. So thank you for spending the afternoon with us. Thank you to Yulia in particular for all the work behind the scenes to get the program ready for delivery. I'm very happy that Leroy Lowe has been chosen as our training facilitator, and Leroy is joining us for the afternoon. He will in fact lead the session. And just a little bit about Leroy to set the context for you. So as a former aerospace and engineering officer and project manager, Leroy began his career in the Canadian Air Force, and he then worked for Spartan of Canada as Director of Business Development, where he recruited and managed a diverse network of agents and distributors and strategic alliance partners in over 20 countries. So for the past 2 decades, Leroy has been a full-time faculty member in international business at the Nova Scotia Community College and has been actively involved in international business development as a consultant for that period of time, helping many small to medium-sized businesses across many different sectors with all aspects of exporting. So Leroy is coming to us with a whole host of other professional and educational experiences, and including the CITP, so the International Trade Professional Designation. And we're so grateful, Leroy, that you've taken the opportunity to help us to prepare the training program and to, again, spend time with our Atlantic Canadian exporters and sharing what this virtual trade business is all about, sharing your tips and insights and practical tools. So I'm going to turn it over to Leroy, and you can talk about how you're going to map out the session and breaks and end time. And then I'll come back on at the end and thank everybody. And I wish you all a very productive afternoon.
Sure. Thanks so much, Suzanne. Maybe we could do a quick around the room just so I know who's with us. And if you could just introduce yourself briefly and give us a little bit of your background. And I'm happy to share a little more about sort of my background as it relates specifically to this workshop. And then I'll give you some a high-level overview of what we're going to do in the next few hours. So if we could go around the room, how about we start with Alexa?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me and putting on this session. I'm really looking forward to it. So I've been with ONB a number of years. I've spent the last 5 years on the business growth team. So working with local New Brunswick companies, helping them grow and expand. I actually recently joined the export development team. So it's been about a week. So I'm really, I'm here to learn and excited to sink my teeth into all things trade. So looking forward to today.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Sam. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute, I guess.
I don't think this,
Sure. Go ahead, Danielle.
Sam is with me at Captain Dan's, and I'm the assistant controller for a seafood processing plant. Sam is our sales administrator, and we're here to see what we can learn on virtual trade, see if it can help us with our sales, because we do sell to the States and to China a lot. So yeah, if we can learn something new, that's great.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Doa.
Hi, my name is Doa Mahmoud, and you can call me Dee. I work as Settlement Communication Coordinator in Multicultural Association of Fredericton. And I am attending to learn more about how to do virtual, or joining or participation in virtual exhibitions or trades and so on. So I wanted to learn more about that.
Great. Amy.
Hi, it's nice to meet all of you. I'm only going to be able to take part of a small bit of this today, unfortunately. I'm an engineer with CBCL Limited in St. John, New Brunswick, and we've recently opened an Ottawa office, and so I'm just learning a little bit about. Just want to kind of get some good tips on best practices, as well as we do some work overseas.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Carrie.
Yes, hi, Carrie Higgins here with Wood. I am looking to better understand, best practices to export our services. We're like CBCL, an engineering consulting firm. So looking to expand our geographic footprint with service offering.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yulia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Yulia Demish, and I'm an export development executive with Nova Scotia Business Inc.
Perfect, thank you. And Diane, I think you're the only one left.
Actually, there's Mustafa that just came with us.
Oh, sorry,
just came on call.
Sure, Mustafa. Mustafa, I think you're on mute if you're trying to talk.
Yes.
There we go.
Hi, this is Mustafa from BioPolyNet.
Mustafa, can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Yeah, BioPolyNet work on natural biopolymers, and we have US patent and Canadian patent on our technology. Our technology work on wastewater treatment and mining industry.
Okay, great. What do your products do?
We have the technology is a new technology. If you add with water, trap all solid and everything exists in the water, and you will have very clean water and a solid. So we work with South Africa now. We have a joint venture with them. Also, we have an agreement with GE, General Electric, and also we could connect to German company, a biogas company, a big leader in the world, and also Nexa. Nexa is a mining company where the company exists in the Brazil. So we have some.
So I take it your product isn't primarily for water purification; it's for other applications and industrial applications.
Yeah. For example, in the Brazil, we work on removal of zinc from their wastewater. Also, in in Germany, we work on biogas, how you can separate all nutrient exist in the biogas wastewater, and we could receive very clean water.
Okay, good. Did I miss anybody? Diane, back to you maybe?
Yes, sure. So I'm a trade mission specialist. I work with Opportunities NB, and I am one of the organizers for this event. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Okay, well, look, let me give you my background. I know that Suzanne already gave you an overview. I'll just a couple of things I'd like to add, perhaps. My background being in sales and marketing, business development primarily. I've been to a lot of physical trade shows pre-COVID. I also worked for 12 years for a software company in Ottawa, also doing business development. I did a lot of physical trade shows for them. I've also been on trade missions with the government for a number of different types of business development. And today's event is actually quite timely, of course. It was really pulled together rather quickly. I mean, over several months, but in a timely fashion, because it was really intended to deal with the massive changes that are taking place in all of trade, especially as it relates to trade shows, trade missions, and those kinds of events. Now, just to give you a quick overview of today's session, well, we're going to talk about trade events and specifically companies' readiness, the sales and marketing strategy, the virtual events themselves, what to do to get ready for them, what to do at them, best practices. These details were pulled together by surveying a lot of companies over the last 6 months that have been attending and participating in these kinds of events. And I'll say that what you're going to get today, this afternoon, is a bit of a hybrid. We're going to talk about best practices as it relates to trade show activities in general, but with very specific best practices as has emerged from companies that have been attending these kinds of events in a number of different industries across a number of different sectors. So the idea here is that hopefully in the amount of time that we have, you'll feel like you've got a very good background, solid background for approaching the kinds of virtual events that are currently being organized. And I would think that whatever you take from this, whether it's a virtual event or not, you're going to get some really good best practices as it relates to physical events. And hopefully in the next year or two, we'll be back to physical events anyway. But our emphasis here is on virtual trade activities. And I guess I'd like to start perhaps by kind of giving you a little bit of an overview of what those events look like. Has anybody in this group been on a trade mission? Like if you participated in a trade mission or organized a trade mission, one that you've been involved in and attended? Has anybody done that? Diane, is your hand up there? Yes. Or is that your light is on? Your light is on for a reason. I guess I'm interested to hear from you. Can you describe a little bit how a typical trade mission works from your perspective?
Oh, well, possibly Suzanne Turmel or somebody else. This is hilarious because I joined this team in October or November. So I joined just as, there was only virtual happening, right?
Right.
So the only trade events I have joined are the ones that are virtual.
Okay.
And yeah.
Sure. Suzanne, have you been on a trade mission?
I have been on so many. I have organized so many, big and small, around the world.
Maybe just give us a flavor of a general description of what a trade mission looks like. Right.
So these are connector events. They typically take place over a fixed period of time, 3 or 4 days in market. So in the city, in the country that we're targeting. and would always include some business to business, what we call matchmaking programs, where we're connecting our companies with potential new business prospects that are located in that city or in that country, if you will. And so the mission itself would feature any number of prearranged business meetings. Sometimes they would feature group briefing sessions where we collect all of the company participants and share with them information about the particular market. Sometimes these are very industry focused programs, but sometimes they're multi-industry focused. And so we want to give a nice snapshot of how to do business in that particular marketplace, what people need to know in order to be successful culturally, business etiquette wise, and just a broader understanding of the economy and the opportunities in the marketplace. Sometimes too, these missions will include a networking activity. So on top of the prearranged business meetings, we may convene or host, if we're partnering with our Atlantic Canadian colleagues, then we might host an Atlantic Canadian business reception. So all of our companies and business organizations, trade commissioners, business development consultants that we might invite from that market would come and join us for a couple of hours and just get to know us in a more casual basis, if you will. So when COVID hit, of course, there's no travel, and there was an immediate abrupt end to all of our planned programs where travel was a required component. And we had to quickly learn how to host B2B connector events in what we call this virtual world. And we're still learning.
Yeah, that's a great segue. And I want to also compare that a little bit to what's happened in the trade show sector. Most people have been to a trade show of one type or another, whether it's a local trade show or an international trade show. But typically a typical trade show involves a lot of companies in a particular sector setting up and putting usually a physical booth together to display sort of marketing materials, promotional materials, and to make people available. And then buyers converge on a single location where they can potentially see hundreds, even thousands of vendors in one place. And as you can imagine, I don't know how many of you have been to trade shows, but I've been to some international trade shows that literally have thousands of vendors taking up massive sprawling conference facilities. Now, there are billions of dollars at stake in this industry. And so I guess what I wanted to give you a sense of is how aggressively these organizations that organize large conferences have tried to rapidly redeploy some sort of virtual event that will allow them to replicate what they were doing on the ground, because in many cases, this is or has been one of their primary sources of revenue. So I know, for example, and I've been involved in the planning and organizing of some virtual events, just as Suzanne has mentioned, they're doing. I've been seeing some very larger groups organizing events, and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars literally on new platforms, virtual platforms that somehow mimic what happens in the real world. And by that, I mean, there might be a reception area where people can meet in a face-to-face environment like this, but there's also physical space is replicated in the virtual world where there are hallways and rooms that you go in, and people's booths are represented with graphics and video and other kinds of multimedia that they make available. And then you can interact with the people from the companies or whatever. But these events are, I guess what I wanted to give you a sense of is how quickly this has changed. So I've been to 4 of these events already, and the platforms vary considerably because they're all a bit of an experiment. They're being stood up quickly. and everybody does things slightly differently, but the idea is the same, that the trade missions that Suzanne was talking about and the conferences, which I mentioned, are all basically seeing people converge in a virtual space with a common agenda, and that is to meet one another and to find partners and develop partnerships and develop new business. So today's session is largely about trying to talk to you about best practices from what we know of companies that have attended these kinds of events already just in the past year, and give you a sense of, how to approach these events in a way that gives you the best possible chance of either finding new partners that are a good fit for your business or finding new ways to develop business out of these activities. Some of these events, when you hear or see the word conference, will contain an educational component. And by that, I mean conferences often have guest speakers, experts who talk, and then there will be sometimes like a trade show component with that, where some people will set up and have booths. And in this case, this is still happening virtually, where people are having guest speakers, more like a webinar. And yet there's still commercial presence by companies that have set up virtual booths so that the attendees to these conference sessions can still interact with the sponsoring companies that maybe have a similar interest to the attendees. Now, there are a lot of different combinations of these, and the platforms are all slightly different. So today's session, we won't be able to dissect any one platform, but at least I want to make sure that you're clear on what we're talking about. We're talking about preparing for these virtual events. And we're going to give you as many best practices as we can and give you some sense of, how to successfully approach it. Now, one thing that's happened through this process is that despite the fact that some companies are literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars rebuilding their platforms, their costs have come down dramatically. Most organizers of these events are used to paying for food and beverage, physical space at a big hotel or a big conference or convention facility, travel for guest speakers, travel for the team that's organizing it. And so the overheads on running one of these events can be substantial. And what doesn't matter whether it's a trade show or trade mission, there's a lot of physical movement associated with these activities that makes them expensive to organize and run. And now with these virtual platforms, the numbers, the sort of behind the scenes numbers on costs have come down dramatically, which is making most organizers are cutting the price of these events by 50% or more. So attending the event is suddenly much, much less expensive than it was previously. The organizers are still able to make a reasonable amount of return. And in some cases, organizers are seeing greater attendance for a couple of reasons. One is their events suddenly much more accessible to people that otherwise perhaps wouldn't have had the time or budget to travel. Now they can do it online. And the cost of admission is much lower, sometimes half. So with no travel costs and a lower admission cost, there are many more options for you to consider. If you work at a company that has a regular trade show agenda, usually the limit in the number of shows that you attend is based on, how many do you have people to available who could be out of the workplace for that period of time, and how much can you afford? And suddenly, more people from your workplace theoretically could attend because the time away is potentially much less. You can be much more selective about it. Travel costs are gone, and the event costs are much lower. So some businesses are now struggling figuring out which events they're going to attend because there's more available. That's good news for most businesses because it means that events maybe that they previously wouldn't have attended, they have access to, and they could attend, and not just one person from the marketing department. You might be able to add other expertise to the event as well and still do it at a reasonable cost with less time. So I want to focus in on sort of figuring out one, you know, how do you figure out which events are the best fit for your business? And then two, if you're going to attend these events, what are best practices for attending and how do you make them pay so that they do return? Because for most businesses, it doesn't matter what you do. If you've been in business, it's a little bit of a race. And by that, I mean, the goal is to make as much profit as possible in a short amount of time as possible. So nobody has time to waste. And if you're going to attend these events, they need to pay off. They need to be something that will generate a return. So we're going to talk about best practices to make sure there is a return. And we're also going to talk about sort of how do you position yourself for the events that are going to be best fit for your company. Before I go further, does anybody have any questions about any of that? It's really just sort of setting the stage to give you a sense of the direction I want to take this, but I'm hoping that sort of gets you headed in the right direction. Any questions at all? All right, let's talk about trade readiness. And I'm not going to back up too much because lots of you will, if you're involved in international business, you've already probably had either coaching or advice in this regard. And, but I do want to draw some parallels between the challenges that businesses face in international business and the challenges that they face in business in general. For most companies, the challenge from a strategic planning standpoint is to develop tight focus on the things that matter most and that are going to make the biggest difference to your business. And when you're in a small company and there's only a small number of employees, usually you don't have enough bandwidth to do everything you want to do. I mean, the business owner or the business owners will typically look ahead at, you know, where do they see the business in 3 years, 5 years, whatever. They have sort of a vision of where they want the company to go. And when they build out a list of, you know, what should we be doing, typically that list is much bigger than anybody has the capability to do. I mean, you can't do it all. So you're usually being selective in what you do. Companies that have been involved in formal strategic planning sessions will sometimes use something like a basic SWOT analysis to look at what are the internal strengths and weaknesses, what are the external opportunities that could be pursued, and threats to the business. And typically this involves senior management team listing everything out. You know, what are all of our weaknesses? What are all of the things that opportunities we could pursue? What are all of the threats we need to worry about? And then prioritizing them. You know, which ones are most important? And usually that list, which gets produced, you know, all the things that we need to work on, all the things that we could be pursuing, all the things that we need to worry about. Typically that list is huge. And if you're in a small business, you're trying to figure out, well, what are the business priorities? And you try to focus the team on the things that are going to get you the farthest ahead, the fastest, because usually you can't do it all. So you have to be somewhat selective. I'm telling you this because I like to draw straight parallel lines between strategic planning and trying to focus on the aspects of the business that are going to help you grow quickest with pursuing exports, because what a lot of companies fail to connect, I guess, fail to see, is that it's equally as important to focus your export efforts. And if you're going to decide what kind of virtual events you're going to go to, then having some sense of priorities in terms of export markets is really an important part of making sure that you're situated properly. So if you really want to get the best returns, you need to spend some time figuring out, you know, where are your market priorities. Now, look, if there are 200 plus countries around the world, you can't go to all of them at the same time, not in any organized fashion. And there's value in focusing your efforts on the ones that are going to yield the greatest returns. So how does a company set priorities for markets that they're going to pursue? To anybody, just if you look at 200 countries around the world and you say, you know, where is our company going to focus next to bring us the greatest returns the quickest possible way possible? How does a company figure that out? Mustafa? You're on mute, I guess, maybe. Sorry.
Thanks.
Are you there?
Yes, yes, I am.
Did you have a suggestion? My question that I'm asking is, how does a company prioritize in terms of markets that it wants to pursue?
Our history is completely different because we focus first on product development, and through product development, our business model is kind of open innovation was about open innovation challenge. So through our open innovation challenge, we received our customer and then validate which one is better for us, or how our product work or fit for their industry. In this case, so we could find our priority in our market now, but it took us, I think, more than 4 years. It's not.
Yeah. Now, even with the assistance of identifying the right partners with the best prospects during the development stage, potentially now you're faced with the idea of, okay, with that partner, we've got a direction in terms of the product and the positioning and how it can work for a particular industry. But now you'll be faced with, how do I go to next markets in other countries and find similar customers for the same product? And presumably you won't treat all other markets equally. You will set some priorities for new markets, won't you?
Yeah, that's kind of
right. And I guess the question I'm asking you is, so what kind of criteria would you envision using to decide which will be your priority markets next?
It depends on the country we deal with them. For example, in the Germany, when we were for validated of a product, the price was important, but for Brazil, no, it was the price, no priority. The problem was important. It depends on the country and the project.
Right. So what I guess where I'm trying to get to, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is that you're going to develop for your business the markets, the kinds of markets that are most attractive to you. If you think that the countries that have the greatest emphasis on the technical problem are the best fit for your business, you're going to look for markets that have those kinds of opportunities. If you think that the countries that are price focused are going to be the best fit for your particular offering, you're going to look for markets that are highly price sensitive. And it doesn't matter whether it's your business or any business. The idea is that we create criteria that help us prioritize which markets are most attractive. And that's going to vary by business. But the idea is at least that we develop priorities. That if I can use the metaphor, the analogy of low-hanging fruit, we're looking for markets where the opportunities are easiest, greatest, returns the quickest first. And then we'll focus on harder to access, more different, distant, more highly regulated or greater competition or whatever. We're going to focus on smaller, tougher markets last and bigger, easier markets first. That's sort of a natural tendency. But the idea is that companies need to make sure they have these priorities set out before they build an agenda of events they're going to attend, because this will have a huge impact on the kinds of events you choose to attend. You can choose global events. You can find global events where people come from every market in the world. But we're going to talk today about how you approach these events and the kinds of efforts you put in, and whether you're choosing a global event or a very much more narrowly focused regional or country event, you still need to do a certain amount of upfront planning, preparation, and business development work if you want to make these events pay off. And I guess I want to highlight the fact that that involves companies making hard decisions about the markets they're going to focus on, because that's going to give them the greatest opportunities for success. So, as I said, for some companies, developing priorities from a strategic planning standpoint for the business, just general priorities, is hard enough. And I want to overlay on that companies that are pursuing international markets need to spend considerable energy rationalizing and developing a short list of markets that they think are highest priority, best opportunities for them to be pursuing first, because most companies realistically can only pursue 1 or 2 new markets at a time. I mean, I know small businesses, some of them, who just quote everybody, and anybody that emails them from anywhere on the planet, they send them quotes, and occasionally they get lucky and they'll send a container of something to some country, or they'll get a project in another country, but it's random. And this doesn't always result in the kind of durable business that most companies want. Most companies are looking for expanded business that gives them ongoing business development opportunities, which are comparable to what they have in the domestic market, but, you know, taking in the geography of a new territory. And so what we're going to focus on is, you know, what are the best ways to develop durable business and make sure that you're building on your domestic business into new markets in a way that allows you to have sort of ongoing, consistent, regular new business, which will allow your business to grow. If I can give a quick example, I would say that when you talk to most businesses and you ask them basic questions about their own business, about from a marketing standpoint, you know, how big is the market? You know, in millions of dollars, how many millions of dollars per year does this market consist of in the country that you're located in? Most businesses can tell you that. If you say, who are the major players? You know, who are the major competitors, and what niche or what positioning do each of those major players fill in the market? You know, what's their value proposition that makes them different from one another? And what kind of market share do they have? If you talk to somebody in the marketing department in most companies, they have a basic sense of that. They know the product, the price, the place, the promotion approach of each of the companies. They know who the competitors are, where certain competitors are strong and other competitors are weak. And they know this like breathing, like it's their market, they're in it every day. They see the same competitors. If they're bidding on projects, they see the same competitors. They know who wins what kind of work. If they're a product-based company, they know what products are being sold, and they know what products the competitors offer, and they know what kind of market share they're getting. Now, why am I telling you this? Because in exporting business, some companies are focused on just making sales. Like, I just need to sell another, you know, whatever, container loader product or something. And they believe somehow that exporting is different than their domestic business, that they have to know all that to do domestic business. But for exporting, they're going to find opportunities just to sell a container loader product to somebody. And so I've been in small businesses that have like a dartboard on the wall, not a dartboard, but a map on the wall with a bunch of either darts or pins in it that say, you know, we've sold products to all these countries. But when you ask them, oh, do you have ongoing business to all those countries? Then a lot of times the answer is, well, no. You know, we made one sale to this country 10 years ago. We made one sale to this country, you know, 5 years ago, whatever. That's, like I said, not the goal for most businesses. Most businesses want to grow into new markets in a way that is sustainable and durable new business. So I'm saying, at least I hope you can see that if you're going to do business in a new market, it's equally important to have enough understanding of the market conditions of the high priority markets, the ones you're focused on, that you can make a market assessment. that you know how big that market that you're focused on is, that you know the way that it's segmented. And it might be different segmentation than your domestic market because customers are different and customer needs might be different. That you know who the main competitors are and you know the sort of marketing mix that they're bringing into the marketplace, which gives them different positioning from one another, so that if you're looking at a new market for your own business, that you understand that market as well as you understand your own market, or at least you understand it well enough to know how to get started. And a lot of exporting companies don't take their exporting efforts seriously like this. One, they don't set priorities of 1 or 2 priority markets. 2, they don't intend to gather the kind of market intelligence first that would allow them to understand those details in the same way they understand the details in their own market. I mean, they just don't think it's necessary. And I guess I want to emphasize here that that's really important. Additionally, I want to talk about the fact that in those target markets, in this new environment, digital assets are really important. Now, the biggest digital asset that most businesses have is their website. Of course, websites have been around a long time and companies put a lot of time and energy into their website. But the question that I would ask is, if your top next 2 markets are Germany and Brazil, whatever, have you given thought to understanding what, and do you know enough about those markets in Germany and Brazil to start to make changes to your website that will speak to people in those markets? Because at some stage you need to get very sharply focused on those markets and show that those are high priorities for your business in some kind of visible way, and your website's the first place to begin. So we're going to talk about that later. But I guess I want to say that companies that have prioritized certain markets need to then take steps to sort of help move them in that direction, because when they run into potential partners, when they run into potential customers, et cetera, the first thing anybody will do is they're going to look at their website. And the question that you need to ask is whether or not has anything at all been done to make sure that the customers from those target markets, those high priority target markets, have an understanding that you're committed to the market that they're in. Of course, there's other digital sales collateral, and this could be, video library. How much of your content that could be in video is in video, and where's that kept? Do you have a Vimeo account or a YouTube account, and does somebody manage it actively? Because lots of companies have YouTube account, but it's a smattering of things that were randomly put in there because somebody was saying, what do we do with this video? And they were like, oh, I will put it on YouTube. But it's not like something that was taken on in an organized fashion. So getting ready for one of these virtual events, you almost need to take an inventory of what you have. What do you have for brochures? Are they focused on the target markets that are your priorities? What do you have for video? Is there anything that can be done to make those videos more appealing or more relevant to the target markets that you're focused on? Is there anything that can be done with language or subtitling or indicating on your website, which markets you're focused on, or even creating a separate entryway for people from a different market so that when they come to your website, they click a different flag and they get a slightly different version of your website. Has any of that been done? This is really, can be important stuff. And we'll talk more about how much of that needs to be done, but I want you to at least think about this as part of being ready, is doing an inventory of what you have right now, because when you look at what kinds of events you're going to attend, this is going to become an important part of what you bring with you to those specific events. The last thing I want to talk about is building websites that are customer-centric. Now, most people don't do a good job at this domestically. What do I mean when I say customer centric? Well, most businesses will spend 95% of their time focused on their own business. And by that, I mean, if you were to go inside of a company and you were to start to talk to people in the business about what they spend their time on, 95% of the employees spend 95% of their time focused on the domestic internal workings of their company. Now, when you ask them to build a website, the tendency is to say, oh yeah, well, we'll create a website that tells the world what we do. And the website becomes a reflection of what they do. Ta-da, it's like, here's what we do. Now, this is quite a different mindset than, and a lot of businesses do this, but this is a very different mindset than thinking about the customers that are being served. I'll give you a simple example. I had a small business, a high-tech company in near where I live, whose business was primarily creating tests and test kits for a variety of applications, some of which were used by researchers, some of which were used by government, some of which were used by retail customers. And these kits, these scientific kits, they spent a lot of their time internally, like any company, making them, thinking about them, designing better ones, etc. And when it came time to build their website, they put all of their energy on explaining to people what they did. And when I sat with them initially and said, okay, who are your customers? They described to me very quickly, they understood this intuitively. They understood that they were serving three different segments. We have researchers who want this kind of information, who use these for different purposes, et cetera, et cetera. And we have government people that use them in a regulatory manner, and they use them in this way, and they have these kinds of questions. And we have retail customers, entirely different. They buy different quantities. They want them shipped directly by FedEx or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. They have different questions, different issues, et cetera. And when we went to their website, none of that was there, because their website was a reflection of what they did. Here's what we do, ta-da. And so they were fielding repeated questions from different categories of customers who had different issues and couldn't find that on their website. Now, I give you this example because this is what a lot of companies do, and it's really not, it's not customer friendly. And it creates a lot of extra work for yourself. So instead, we rebuilt their website. When you went to it, there were three main menu items, government, researchers, and, retail customers. We didn't call them retail customers, but individual people who were looking for their products, we gave them a separate category. And now when somebody came to the website, all the content for each of those three segments is tailored for those customers. It's written specifically for them. Oh, if you're a researcher, you're going to want to know this about this item. If you're in the government and you went through a different menuing because you're government, we say, oh, you're going to want to know this about the same item, but now it's different terminology, different language, different issues that are explained, et cetera. And oh, if you're a retail customer, here, we're going to tell you this about this product, and it's quite different again. But now the website is tailored by customer segment. Why am I telling you this? Well, first of all, companies don't do a good job of this domestically, thinking about the segments that they serve domestically and building a website that is focused on those segments as opposed to being focused on the business itself. Like, what are the questions that the customers from each segment are going to ask? And what's the language that needs to be used? What are the issues that they're going to raise, and building that into the website instead of saying, this is what we do. Now, I raise this because in an international business setting, you have to consider the fact that the segments that you're going to be reaching to may have different needs. In the high priority markets that you choose, if you're going to Germany and Brazil, with a little bit of market intelligence and learning and understanding how big is the market, what are the segments, who are the key players, what's the positioning, et cetera, you may discover the segments that are most relevant to your business. And you may discover those segments are slightly different than your domestic segments. Again, is your website ready for those new markets that you're going to? And you know, whether you build that into the interface of your main website or whether you create different menuing for people from different countries is something that you need to confront. But the fact is that just having your domestic website with its own flaws, potentially, and your own focus on your own business domestically may not be adequate to really convince or to be reassuring to new customers in new markets, different segments and different needs. So this is, you know, if I can kind of draw you a line here, I'm trying to say from a strategic planning standpoint, companies need to know that exporting is a good fit in their priorities. From an exporting standpoint, you have to identify priority markets as the places you want to focus on. That gets you a short list, which allows you to make sure your energy is much more tightly focused on the markets that matter most. Once you've got those markets identified, you've got to build market intelligence. You have to get a picture of the markets and understand them well enough to know whether or not how big they are, the segments, and who the competitors are, and where you might fit. That takes some effort, and we'll talk about sort of what that looks like specifically in lead up or preparations for one of these events. But the point is that this gets you to the point where you've got markets to focus on, which helps you make better choices about which events to attend, given that events are now less expensive and more readily available and rapidly becoming something that you could easily afford and take less time. You have to have a focus to make sure that happens. And once you've figured out which events you're going to attend, and once you know that, you know, you've got a short list of markets that are a good fit for your export efforts, you've got to do a bit of an inventory over your digital assets so that you start to figure out whether or not the materials you have are adequate. And, you know, it's the word that I'm looking for. I don't want to say world class because I don't want to sound like I'm putting on airs or something, but I don't know if that's the right phrase, but what I'm trying to say is I don't want, your digital assets don't have to be world class, but they certainly need to be top quality. And if they're going to be top quality, you need to not just think about them from the domestic perspective, but you need to think about them from the export perspective as well, specifically as it relates to the markets you're focused on. And unless you know something about the markets you're focused on, you won't know whether or not your current digital assets are adequate, whether the sales collateral, the social media efforts you have, and your website, et cetera, whether they are tailored appropriately for those new markets you're interested in. You won't be able to judge that unless you actually have done some homework on those markets themselves. So we're going to get there. After the break, I'm going to start to break this down into pieces, like how do we approach this, and why does this matter for a preparation for a virtual event, whether that's a trade show replacement or a trade mission replacement, but some kind of event where we're going to meet buyers and sellers. Why is this important? I'm going to try and dissect that and walk you through the steps, like what is it you need to do so that you're ready, and how does that tie into these events that we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to pause there before we go further, but does anybody have any questions at all on anything I've said so far?
It's Carrie here. It's not a question, but just a comment. The size of my company is such that it's challenging to tailor kind of what the online presence looks like. So I'm just trying to incorporate what you're saying into something that can be actioned and tangible kind of at the local working level too.
So let me ask you this. You have one website that caters to everybody, I'm assuming, correct?
Yep. Yes.
And how big is your website, like in terms of pages?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. We're global 60,000 person company.
Okay. So, And what does the website do for languages? It provides the same website for different people in different countries. You just click the button and it goes to different, a different language.
I believe so, yes.
So you're not sure because you always get the English version for Canadians.
Exactly, yeah. Right. I would need to double check, yep.
So looking at your website from that perspective is a good starting point. I don't know who looks after your website. Obviously, it's not somebody local for a company of your size. But the question I would be asking, since you are such a large business with so many different pieces, questions that I would be asking is, in the markets that are most interesting to you, and I'm assuming your business has some markets that would be priorities, and if not, you certainly should develop some priorities based on what you're focused on right now. The question I would be asking is, when somebody from those markets goes to your website, what options do they have? Do they get a different language? And is the content exactly the same, or has it been tailored for those countries already? Like perhaps somebody's already doing a certain amount of tailoring, but these are good questions to ask if you don't know. And that would be my starting point, because you may discover that somebody has already decided that in a particular market, they're not showing the same content they show in the Canadian market.
Right.
And I don't know your company well enough to know whether or not that's being done, but that's very common for very large companies to have somebody who says, in Germany, we're going to focus on these things, but in Canada, we're going to focus on these things. And even though the website, when you click, the little flag or whatever it is to get to a different language, isn't just a translation by language, it's also a different content that gets shown. And so that would be something that I would be interested in if I was you, that I would want to investigate.
No, that's great, helpful, thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's take first of all, does there anybody else have anything that they wanted to ask about at all? Okay, let's take a quick break. We're going to take 15 minutes, so we'll start again at 2:15. But when we come back, I'm going to start to drill down to, what steps do you take? And Carrie, I'll give a little more thought to what you're asking about, and I'll try and keep you in mind. But certainly, if you have anybody has other questions, certainly think about them over the break, and we'll talk. I'll field questions when I get back. And the goal will be to start to develop a bit of a process so that you can think about how would you approach going to one of these events, and how do you turn one of these events into something that has the highest prospects of generating new business for your company. So we'll pause here, and I'll see you all in 15 minutes at 2:15. Okay, I promised before the break I would pause before we started again for any other questions. During the break, did anybody think of anything or have any questions they wanted to ask before I go further? Next, we're going to talk about getting ready for a virtual event, I guess. And I wanted to know, though, if anything that I said before the break raised any other questions that anybody happens to have. Nothing at all. Okay, let's talk about planning. And I'm going to talk about sales and marketing strategy, about the events themselves, and then, being ready for a specific event. I want to start by talking about sales and marketing strategy, because I want to reframe perhaps what you might be thinking when you sign up for a virtual event. I don't know what any of you have for experience with trade shows in the past, but certainly good practices in trade shows don't change very much. That's not the right word because there's lots new here, but understanding the trade show process as the culmination of something, the event, rather than the beginning of something, will change the way you treat these events. And I would say that people who do this, who treat events as a culmination of something, have much better results than people who see it as the beginning. I'll tell you, early in my career, I went to a number of trade shows. You know, my background's in aerospace, and so, you know, I typically am looking at long sales cycles. You know, could be 2 or 3 years before something is purchased that, you know, people talk about for several years before an actual purchase happens. And so I don't, you know, when I would go to a trade show, we would, you know, our checklist for getting ready would look like, you know, don't forget to take the booth. I'm kind of being funny, but you understand that most of our preparations for a trade show were about making our presence ready. But I can remember being on 1 or 2 trade missions where people on the way home from a trade mission were like, you know, oh, I got a purchase order for $1 million. And I was shaking my head thinking, you know, how is that even possible? Because in my business, you would never just meet somebody and get a purchase order for $1 million. Now, I'm not suggesting that the person who said that just met somebody and got a purchase order for $1 million. It may very well have been the end of a process rather than a beginning. But we used to treat trade shows in the early stages of my career as a place for lead generation. If you think about the sales funnel, you know, we have that image of a big wide funnel at the top and sales at the bottom. We think about unqualified initial leads at the top, large group, better qualified, you know, group, smaller, and then serious buyers, even smaller still, and then actual buyers, even smaller still. And the idea is to keep lots of leads at the top of the funnel to get, you know, more sales coming out the bottom. We used to treat our trade shows, early years of my career, as lead generation. Just get ready, pack the stuff up, show up at a trade show, meet all the new people for the first time if you've never met them before. You know, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. And then you would come home after being away for a week, usually with a pile of email and other things that needed to get done. And you had a big bunch of leads that were largely unqualified, people that you had just met. You really didn't know whether it was going to go anywhere, and you sort of dreaded digging into that pile. And it's well known that following a lot of trade shows, companies fail to follow up, often because the people who were at the shows had a big pile of work to catch up on when they got home, and then kind of dreaded digging into that big pile of leads after, because it was an unqualified bunch and you never really knew what it was going to turn into. Now, I want you to reframe that idea, not think about the trade show or the virtual event as a lead generation opportunity where you're meeting people for the first time. I want you to reframe it as a culmination event where you spend several months making sure that your contacts at the event, many of whom you've already been in touch with, and they've already developed a certain degree of comfort with who you are. And by the time you're meeting them at the trade show, you could be much further along in the process, and they could be much further along in terms of being qualified and ready and know who you are and all of that, so that the people you're meeting at the show are people that all those initial barriers about, you know, nice to meet you for the first time, all those initial barriers and bits of reluctance they might have are kind of out of the way. I don't know how many of you have traveled around the world and been to different countries, but when you do international business, you realize that some cultures are much more transactional than others. I mean, there are certain cultures where, you know, it's like, let's just get down to business. And when you meet somebody, it's like, you know, let's talk business. There are parts of the US that are like that. And there are other countries where it's much that way. But in a lot of countries, the culture is such that, you know, they want to get to know you first. And there's a reason for that, especially if you're talking large amounts of money. They want to know that you're going to be around, that if they make a strategic decision for their business to do business with your business, whether that's a partnership or whether it's on a purchasing arrangement or distribution agreement or something, they want to know that if that strategic decision is going to be a good one, that you will be somebody that is good to deal with, that you are somebody who is reliable, and that they trust you and know you. And so the process to getting to that point in doing business with those in those cultures really involves a certain amount of time. There's no shortcuts around this. A certain amount of this is time. Now, you can improve the time frame by finding ways to show yourself as being more credible along the way. We'll talk about that. You can more frequent contact without being annoying can be helpful, and being seen in the same audiences as where, you know, the person you're trying to do business with is located helps to build credibility and give them confidence that you are somebody who they can work with. And so I want you to reframe and rethink about these virtual events and treat them as the end of something. And we'll talk about what that process will look like, but the idea being that you're going to have much better experience if the event that you sign up for is one where you're meeting people, many of whom have already been qualified, who already have developed a comfort level with you, who already know something about you and your company, and you're much further down the road in the process with them before you actually get to the event itself. So some things that you can do, and I want to kind of walk you through what that process could look like and can look like for many businesses. Some event organizers will give you an exhibitor list. Now, the problem with the exhibitor list as a primary source is that depending on the event, sometimes when you sign up for something several months in advance of the event, they might not have the list ready yet. Some event organizers don't make the list available until much closer to the event when it gets finalized. So getting an exhibitor list is helpful. Getting an attendee list is harder. Most event organizers don't make that available until either shortly before the event or after the event. So you might not be able to get that ahead of time, depending on the organizers themselves. But one thing that you can do if you've actually spent time setting priorities for your business, one thing that you can do if you know the markets that you're interested in is start to focus on identifying potential partners, potential customers, whatever it is your particular business is looking for, business opportunities. If it's something that's going to go to public tender, sometimes you're looking for key people in the decision-making process who are kind of keeping their head up and wanting to know what's going on while they're writing up requirements or a project plan or whatever that won't become public till later. If you're selling products to a distributor, or if you need some sort of in-market partner for a joint venture or something, you know, this might not be a very big list, but one thing that you can do is you can start by focusing on the market that you're most interested in and start to develop a list of contacts of people that you'd like to meet. Now, what does this look like? Well, some of it could be, you know, going to different organizations' websites, looking for in maybe government organizations, they may be private sector companies, but finding the kinds of people that you want to meet with at the event, people that would represent the best opportunity for your business. Start to identify a list of them. Get their names initially, if you can, find them. Try LinkedIn and Facebook groups. Most people don't realize, but groups have exploded on LinkedIn and Facebook in ways that are surprising. Facebook, you know, where most people are showing pictures of their babies and their dogs, actually has an enormous number of professional groups in the groups area. And if you search for somebody, you can choose groups, and you can you'll be amazed at how many different groups there are that are professional, because it's a good tool for groups. Like it just says once you join a group, which is as simple as saying join, and somebody agrees to let you in. Once you join a group, you'll find that often the threads are organized. You can search them. You can find out what people have been saying. You'll get updates from that group in your news feed. So even though Facebook is not really a business tool normally, certainly the groups on Facebook, some of them are very business focused. And LinkedIn has a ton of business groups, and not just North American centric, but global now. So, you know, you may be interested in people that, you know, are interested in a particular business sector in a particular country. You may discover that there's a group. Now, the group might only be a few hundred people, but these groups are so narrowly focused, some of them, that you may be able to find exactly who you're looking for. Now, why am I asking you to look for groups where people are located? Because sometimes you can start to ask questions in these forums of people without connecting to them on LinkedIn or friending them on Facebook or whatever. You can start to ask questions of these people that will help you in your own analysis of the market. Now, you'll remember that I said that in most markets, if you have a priority, you should have the lay of the land. You know, how big is the market? What are the segments? Who are the key players, et cetera, et cetera. In some of these groups, you can ask some of those questions. You know, not all of them at once, but you know, you may post a question, you know, my company is interested in this market, it's a priority for us, et cetera, et cetera. We're really interested to know who the, you know, key players are in this sector, or we're interested in knowing how big this market is, or whatever. Now, by posing questions in those forums, you identify yourself. There's a bit of credibility building just in saying, this is who my company is. Here's our website, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're interested. This is why I joined this group. That is visibility for you. And it may turn out that some of the people in that group are key people that you're going to want to speak to. So I'm saying this is a good place to find people that are the right points of contact for you. Now, different countries have different social media networks. So you have to find out what are the predominant business forums in the markets that are most interesting to you. And it may not be Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm just giving those an example. But part of this is figuring out where you're going to find these people. So some of this can happen from scouring websites. You may only have a person's name, you might not have their email address. But sometimes if you know what company that they're with, you can type in first name, last name, and then the domain name from their company's business and the word email, and you can get their email address. Google's pretty good at if somebody's got an email address on the web and you use first name, last name, domain name, and the word email, sometimes you can, it's pretty quick at finding it if it's out there. You don't necessarily need to be in a rush to contact all these people, but the goal is to create a list of potential people that would be the right kinds of people that you would want to meet at the event that you've signed up for. So I don't want to detach this effort from the event. Remember, we are preparing for the event, but I'm saying building a prospect list of people you would like to meet and talk to at the event ahead of time is a good starting point. Now, you can contact the Canadian Embassy. We have trade commissioners. Global Affairs Canada has trade commissioners at every embassy in every country. And if your company is really interested in that market, it's worthwhile talking to your local global affairs person. In most major cities in Canada, there's Global Affairs office. If you go to Global Affairs website, you'll get all the contact details. And you may want to reach out as well on Trade Commissioners website, tradecommissioners.gc.ca. If you just type in Trade Commissioners Canada, you'll get to their website. There is going to be key people for each sector, industry sector in the market that you're interested in going to. There's going to be a directory of people who can contact. So there will be a commercial officer in charge of electronics in Japan or whatever. So contacting them, telling them that you've got an event coming up, asking them if they can direct you to any potential partners or whatever. Sometimes they are forthcoming with potential agents or potential partners or whatever it is that your business is going to need. They can help you develop the list as well. The idea here is that you have a group of people, you don't even know if they're signed up for your event, but these virtual events have gotten less expensive and they don't need to know about the event initially. They just happen to be people that are on your radar because they seem to be a good fit for what your business is trying to accomplish. Now, the goal is to open a dialogue with those people. Now, rather than, contacting them cold and saying, I'm from such and such a company in Canada and, we want your business. Getting opportunities to connect with them in social media forums or other places where they hang out is helpful. Nice thing about LinkedIn is because LinkedIn's got a global footprint as well. If you pay, I think, $80 a month or something, sometimes you can get a month free trial. You can search for people by industry, you can search for people by seniority, you can search for people by role, and you can search for people in a particular country. So it's easy to quickly identify people through LinkedIn that might be good to contact. And one of the things you can do is look for the groups that they're in, go to their LinkedIn profile and go to the bottom of their profile and see what groups they've joined. Join some of the groups that they're in, because sometimes that gives you a place where you can open up a discussion, not necessarily with them directly, but in that setting. So you can post interesting news from your industry. You can ask questions about the market that you're focused on. But by giving yourself visibility in that forum, there's a good chance that some of the people that you're going to want to reach are going to be able to see you before you ever reach out to them. Now, it's easy to give somebody a quick message in LinkedIn. It's a little less obtrusive, seems a little less obtrusive than an email. But if you're in a forum and you see them and you send them a short message to say, hey, I noticed we're in this group together, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that's a softer door opener than sending somebody an email and hoping that you don't get deleted as spam. The point of all of this is to say that this building your funnel early, way before your event, getting lots of people at the top, and thinking about how you might be able to meet them at the event starts with you building a list of potential prospects way ahead of time and cultivating a network of contacts ahead of the event itself. Now, some other things that you can do, the goal, of course, of all of that is to get people who ultimately will come to the event. Now, they may not attend, but like I said, prices have gone down. With the right kind of discussion, you may be able to say, look, maybe you might even be able to give them quotes in advance. You might even be able to open discussions in advance. You might be able to say, look, I'm going to be at this event in, 3 weeks from now or a month or two from now or whatever. I don't know if you've considered attending, but I thought it's the kind of place that, you might be interested in attending because this is who's going to be there, whatever. encouraging your contacts to attend the same event that you're in is a good way to create an opportunity for you to have a discussion in a face-to-face forum like this with them when they are more ready, when they are more comfortable with who you are, et cetera. As long as you've started this process early enough, and for some people that might be 7-8 months away. That means signing up for things 7 or 8 months in advance, developing a list of contacts 7 or 8 months in advance, starting to open the dialogue with those contacts, maybe giving them quotes, et cetera, but at least getting into discussions with them, asking some basic questions, understanding who they are, what they need, and then ultimately hoping that you can get them to the event. Now, if it turns out you can't get them to the event, that's fine, but these events are much more accessible, and building a network of people ahead of time, you're going to get some of them who are going to, they may already be going anyway if the event is focused enough. And if they're not going, you might be able to convince some of them to come. And what you want are opportunities to have a discussion where the guards are down with people who have already sort of been introduced to you in a sort of a professional setting, or seen content you've posted, or comments you've made, or comments you've made about your business repeatedly well before the event. Maybe they've engaged in a bit of dialogue with you, and so that puts you in a much stronger position if you can actually get them then to attend the event, because now we can really get down to talking about business, and hopefully we've provided the context to allow that to happen without all those guards being up, like as though you showed up at the event and it was first time to meet somebody. Now, some things that you're going to need to do. Well, your budget will need to be reworked, because this is a very different process. The face-to-face events were expensive. They required, airfare, hotel, travel time, usually large costs for the physical infrastructure at the facility, all kinds of other expenses. These events are very different. None of those expenses exist, and usually the participation fee is quite low. So now you have to be quite selective about where you're going, but you might want to use some of that, money that would normally be spent on these kinds of physical events to make sure that you have the right kind of supports around you to make this work. You may want to consider having different people come to the event. It might not have made sense to pull your director of operations out of your business for a week to go to a trade show in Japan. But if your director of operations would be a good person to be in a certain speaking engagement, or to be at a certain time, be involved in discussions with key customers, et cetera, you may want to sign that person up for the virtual event, because you can do it with a scalpel, be very exact about when they need to be available and how much time it's going to commit. It's not like taking a week off work and going away. So there's real value in considering who is going to attend these events. And it might not be just, your marketing director, which would historically have been the case. You may want to use some of your additional budget. You may want to use some of your additional budget for sales material. And, Carrie, you mentioned, not knowing what to do about your website, but think about collateral kinds of material that you might have. Do you have good video content? Do you have good physical documentation of certain things that you want to highlight, whether they be, typical sales brochures, white papers, whatever it is that you need, how much of that can you prepare ahead of time with a focus, or at least some emphasis on the things that you think are most important for the markets that are most important to you. If those of you haven't been to Upwork.com, I'll just type this in the chat. If you haven't been to Upwork.com, I encourage you to go there. It's a platform where you can hire almost anything done that can be done virtually. If you put out, if you said, I need my sales brochure redone in German, and you wanted, or let's say you knew somebody, you wanted somebody from Germany with a particular expertise or a particular background in a particular sector, review your materials from a German perspective before having them translated. So you need somebody who's bilingual with the right skills, and you put this up, you could probably get it done for like $100. I mean, there are just so many people on Upwork, literally hundreds of thousands of contractors that are providing professional services based on requirements that are put out. And so if you put up a requirement, I want somebody from Germany with an MBA who's bilingual and has work experience in the food sector to review my company's brochures for suitability for the German market prior to translation. You could put that requirement up on Upwork, and you'd probably have a handful of people bidding on it quickly, and you'd have somebody that could do it quickly. And if you needed it translated, you could get that done there as well. And Upwork is just a platform like eBay or something where people who provide services are aggregated with people who need services. And I recommend it because they went public last year. The website is easy to use. You can set up an account with a credit card. It's like setting up an eBay account, only when you put out a requirement, you can see the work history of all the people that bid on your job. You know how many hours they have done of work on the platform. You know whether or not other people that have hired them have been happy with their work. And if you give them a bad review, that review will show up in their profile and affect all future work that they get on the platform. So most of them are really work hard to try and make sure you're happy. So this is a very good platform for putting out requirements. Now, just to give you a quick example, and I just want to give you a sort of sense of the power of this platform. I went to Indonesia about 3 times in the last few years to do work with the government there on exports. And I wanted some case studies of local companies in Indonesia working on various aspects of exporting. And I was looking for people with MBAs who had good English skills, who could write case studies who had worked in real companies in Indonesia with export experience, who could write on different aspects of exporting. And I put out a requirement to have, these case studies written by a series of contractors. And within several days, within like 3 or 4 days, I was able to get about 10 different contractors to all prepare case studies for me. And I think I produced something like 10 or 12 case studies for about $300. I mean, it was just incredibly fast and efficient, tailored exactly to the market that I wanted, with people exact skills that I was after, who were able to produce something for it very focused. Now, I'm telling you this because if you're trying to revitalize sales materials and you want to make sure that they're perfectly suitable for the market that you're in, or even if you're just looking for some consulting advice, you can find people often with the right skill sets on Upwork. You can hunt them, drill down using different criteria, which country they're from, their fluency in English, what background they have, and you can drill down and find a small group of people that might have the kind of background you're looking for to give you professional insights into that particular market. And you can usually do this very cheaply. So I'm encouraging you to think about the market that you're focused on and whether or not you've got the right materials to support it, because there are ways that you can, there are things you can do now you just simply couldn't do 10 years ago at prices that you never could have gotten them done before. Most people think video editing is really expensive, but video editing has gotten really cheap. Most people think animation is really expensive. Animation has gotten really cheap. So almost anything you could think of, if you needed to have it in another language, if you needed to have it modified, if you had content that you wanted to have updated, you could get it done very inexpensively. And that allows small business to focus quickly on new markets in ways that couldn't be done before. Now, some basic things you might want to do with your website: think about logistics for the market that you're interested in. is that content that's related to the customers you're trying to reach on your website suitable for people in the market you want to go to? Do you have customer service figured out? Now, depending on how ready you are, whether if you're looking for a partner, maybe you need them for customer service, but is the currency the same as the market you're in? I work with a small business in Nova Scotia who was selling things into New England, and people didn't have much patience for, your products aren't priced in US dollars, your delivery logistics doesn't show how long it will take to deliver to Boston. You use certain terminology on your website that we've never heard of before because they use different terminology there. So, this is several years ago, and the company's long since solved the problem, but they realized very quickly that for that particular group in that particular market, which turned out to be really good business for them, they needed to custom build a section of their website that was tailored to that group. Now, it didn't turn out to be a huge effort. It was like several pages of content. But when it was done, somebody from that area, when they came to the website, it was obvious where they would go, and they got very tailored content that was specifically focused on them. And so just something to think about, because if you're prepping for one of these events, the more you can do in that direction, the better. I like to think about, I like to talk about Japan. Japan's a notoriously hard market to enter. I've been there many times, and I had an agent who worked for my company in Japan. We did quite a bit of business there. But what people don't understand is that not only is Japan a large country, which means that it's quite self-sufficient, but it's also an island, which makes it very inwardly focused. And they don't tolerate you not being ready to do business there. And so people who go there who aren't prepared, come home thinking, because everybody's polite, thinking that, the next deal is just around the corner. But in fact, the people that they're meeting with are privately saying, they're not ready. And if I try to flip it around and say, imagine if somebody from Japan came to Canada and went to several meetings with you to work with them as a partner, and all their materials were in Japanese, and all their website was in Japanese, and their business card was in Japanese, and everything that they handed you, you couldn't read. If you were thinking about them coming to Canada to do business, you'd think they're not ready. And yet somehow there are Canadian companies who believe they're going to go to Japan, and their website's still going to be in Canadian English. Their business card's still in English. Their materials are still in English. They've got nothing in Japanese, and they think that their partners somehow are going to nod and go, okay, let's do business together. I'm not saying that could never happen. I'm just saying that their level of acceptance for people that haven't made substantial efforts to be ready for that market is low. And if you're going to be a company that's got priority markets, you should be thinking in that way. How much of my material can I focus on that market, and how hard is that going to be? And I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that it doesn't have to be that hard. You have to gather some market intelligence so that you learn about the market first, which can be part of your process of getting ready for this event. And you need to start thinking about tailoring your website, which can be done cheaply, and tailoring materials you have, digital assets that you have, specifically to that market, so that when you start talking to people and having serious discussions with people about being a partner, being a distributor, being an agent, or whatever it is you're looking for, that you have already made enough of an investment in time to know about the market itself, to know about what the needs are in that market, and to start to have materials to support you in that market that are focused on the things that are most important in that market. And your website maybe has modifications, your materials have modifications. It becomes much more obvious to the person that you're talking to that you're committed. None of these things have to be expensive. In the current environment, most of these things are not expensive, but they do require a shift in thinking about signing up for one of these events, and that is, this can be an important part of culmination of effort focused on opening a new market or two, provided you think about it that way and you start early by developing the network that you need and the dialogue that you need to make sure those meetings, you have some of those barriers down, and you've put some energy into making sure that from a marketing and sales standpoint, you've started to consider what actual pieces are going to support you in that effort, and you've made changes in that direction. Let me pause there because that's quite a bit, but what questions do any of you have? Mustafa, your light is on. Do you have your mic muted? Are you trying to say something or no? Anyone else?
I don't have a question, Leroy, but if I could interject a bit.
Sure.
Yeah. So agree with everything that you're saying. You're spot on. And we've got some, we've created some programs, I think, that can help some of these companies, you know, take that next step to enhancing their online assets. So there's a series of online webinars, and we recorded everything through IBT Online. And we worked with the Nova Scotia Association of Community Business Development Agencies, something like that anyway. And several webinars are now posted, so you can check out the recordings. Things like, you know, preparing for e-commerce, things like why localizing your website is critical. And that's really what you're talking about, right? Making sure that your materials
absolutely,
speak the language, speak the culture, speak the tone. So I'll just put out a shameless plug. Those are really helpful resources that can begin to wrap your heads around exactly what Leroy's talking about in terms of localizing your brand, localizing your
Susan, you said
messaging. Yeah.
Suzanne, you said they'd been posted. Posted where? Sorry.
On that CB, just a second. I'm going to find the link and I'm going to post it here in the chat on the Nova Scotia Community Business, whatever it's called, website that we shared. But I'll post it. I just don't recall offhand the exact.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts before I continue? Anything at all? Okay, so with that kind of backdrop, I want to talk about the virtual events themselves. A few things to keep in mind. When you sign up for any virtual event, looking at who the other exhibitors are can be helpful. Often you're focused on the audience who's coming to the event. I mean, that's usually the draw of why you go to these kinds of events, but looking at other exhibitors can be quite helpful as well. And companies are often surprised at the kind of synergies that they can find with other people that are exhibiting to the same audience. Sometimes you'll meet a good, like a partner you can sort of align yourself with. You have non-competing products, but you're after the same customers. Sometimes you can refer business to one another, that kind of thing. Also, learning about the market that you're interested in. Sometimes talking to exhibitors is a good way to do that. Asking them the basic questions you're looking for answers to, like how big is the market, and you know, how is it segmented, and what's your experience working with people in this market, et cetera. So sometimes the exhibitors represent an untapped resource that a lot of companies overlook. Focusing on speakers specifically as it relates to what you do, the kinds of people you're trying to reach, whether that's an agent or a distributor or a partner of some kind, what would attract them? And focusing on who those speakers are going to be, because You may want to show up at and sign up to go to the speaking sessions, if there's speaking sessions at the event, knowing that there will be people in the room that are the kind of people you want to reach. Being at the event and being prepared to ask questions in those speaker sessions can raise visibility for you. So, you know, if you're listening to a webinar online and somebody at the end says, you know, my name is so-and-so, I'm from such and such a company, these are the questions that I have, that act of somebody sort of getting attention to themselves while they explain the questions they have, that act is actually sometimes good help at building credibility and visibility for the event itself. So that's something to pay attention to as well. Knowing a little bit about the culture, you know, I made all these rookie mistakes in international business when I first started. When I first started in international business, the internet didn't even exist, which is, that's how old I am. But finding out business culture, what norms in business culture was much harder at the time. It's easy now, you know, you type in business etiquette in whatever, Japan, or, you know, business culture in Japan, or meeting etiquette in Japan, or whatever. We'll pull tons of resources on the web. And so you can find out what all those little cultural nuances are, and knowing what the nuances are of the people that you're working with in the market that you're interested in is helpful. We say in, when we talk culture in business, we say you can't stereotype people. You can't assume everybody is the same. But it's helpful to know what norms are in a culture generally, anticipating that the person you meet may be quite unique. They may break stereotypes all over the place, but knowing what the norms are in a lot of cases will keep you out of trouble from being rude. You don't know you're rude, but you may do things that are perceived as being rude if you don't understand the culture. So spending some time on your partners and having an appreciation for their culture and knowing what to look for, that's worthwhile investing some effort in. Look for technology preferences. We did a session the other day and a woman said, you know, in China right now, a lot of people use WeChat as their preferred platform. And everybody uses it, and it's an expectation that you're using it. And if you wanted to use a different platform, people wouldn't give you, they wouldn't use it. I mean, it's assumed if you're in business, you're using that particular platform. So finding out what the apps are and finding out what social media platforms are that are preferred in the market is something that you should make sure you know, so that when you're meeting people from that culture, if you need a particular app to be communicating with them effectively, if you need to be on certain platforms and social media spaces to find them and connect with them, that you know what those are. And find out from the event, that organization that you're organizing, what kinds of digital collateral you're going to need. Because all these new platforms are experimental, they're coming up with all kinds of different ways in which companies can showcase themselves. And so you may need video, you may need videos of yourself doing introductions, you may need videos of your business, you may need digital collateral like PDFs or images or whatever, but finding out what is required is sort of part of the process, and make sure you know well in advance what that looks like. The goal, of course, is to stand out at one of these events. There still can be leads generated, but hopefully what we're preparing for are meetings with a large number of people that you've already sort of opened dialogues with. That's where you'll have much better chance of being successful. And a few things that I'll just point to, these are things that I haven't mentioned yet. Building a company profile and a positioning statement may seem straightforward, but if you've done no homework on the market that you're focused on, and you have a priority market, let's say your priority market is Germany, and you haven't done the homework to know how the segments are organized, or how the market is segmented there, and you have no idea what the priorities are of the people in those segments, then the chances of you writing a profile with the right kind of positioning in it for that market are slim. You can assume that it's what you do domestically, but that's generally a mistake. Most markets are slightly different. I've been in lots of countries where I was always surprised. I met with several distributors and I talked to the distributors, you know, how is the market segmented here? And what you discover is people are just different. They have different priorities, they have different needs. And so when you go to another country, if you assume that the things that are priority for your existing customers are going to be the same for those customers, you're probably wrong. So with that in mind, I want to emphasize that this isn't something to be taken lightly, because the event organizer will say, you know, we need a short company description and, you know, some details about your products. And most people will go copy paste, they'll pull it from their website or whatever. But if this is a large event and there are a lot of attendees, that may be the decision on whether or not they talk to you or not. And by that, I mean, if you're given a large program and there are hundreds of exhibitors, you look at the name of the company and you look at what's written about it and you decide, am I going to talk to them or not? That's it. They don't go the next level to see what's below that. That's the decision. And so if you think about old days, physical trade show, somebody handed you a paper brochure and you took a pen and you went through and you circled the people that you wanted to talk to. And then you hunted them down and you walked by all these other people at the same time because you were just focusing on those people. Well, that decision is made entirely on your company profile. So I'm asking you to focus on a company profile in an international setting, one of these events, and to think very carefully about whether or not you've got enough market intelligence to be able to position yourself in a way that's going to resonate with the customers in the target market. Because if you don't have the market intelligence to know how the segments are organized in that particular market, you won't know what to write. So you can copy and paste it off your own website, but chances of being right are not very good. And a better solution is to do your homework and to spend some time before the event so that your positioning statement is going to resonate with people in that market, because they're like, you know, this is what we think is important. And when they read your profile, you know, your profile says, this is what we do, and this is what we think is important. And guess what? It's the same thing. But you can't do that if you don't know what their priorities are. So you have to do some homework up front. A couple other things I want to mention, things I didn't focus on too much, was that, let's see, I want to talk about pre-event webinars. One thing that some companies are unaware of is sometimes organizing a pre-event or post-event activity can be helpful. Now, if you're going to a conference and there's already all kinds of talks and speaking opportunities, then submit to be a speaker, or have somebody who is an expert from your company, or somebody who's a friend of your company, friendly stakeholder, have them sign up to be a speaker. Any opportunity you can give your business higher priority in the event itself is helpful. If it's not an event that is a conference, but rather it's a trade mission or a trade show or whatever, in this virtual space, you can set up your own webinar ahead or behind the event, pre or post, and you can run a speaking engagement and have people attend based on, you know, email blasting the list of attendees for the event once you have it in hand, and inviting them to a separate activity. Now, why would you do this? A couple of reasons. One is, well, you can position yourself as speaker if you know something about something, and that is a credibility builder. Or you can organize a few speakers on your own. The idea is that sometimes the event organizers aren't thrilled when you do this, but people carve out time for these events. And if you add on, you know, an extra hour at the end or an extra hour at the beginning, they look at it as a whole package, even though you're not part of the main show. The fact that you want to have a gathering virtually, either before or after, is sometimes palatable. People that are attending will look at it and go, yeah, I can find time for that too. I like the idea of that. And if there aren't speakers at the activity, sometimes this is a great way to set that up. So setting up some kind of pre or post event independently can also be a credibility builder. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll take a quick break, is that there's quite a bit here, and this really is something that has to start early. You have to register early for these events when you first see them, hopefully several months in advance, and you have to have a bit of a checklist of what it is that needs to be accomplished. Much like the physical events where, you know, you got together a checklist of all the things that you needed to take with you, this is like building a checklist of everything that you're going to do before the actual event itself. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. First time through, it may be just sort of, you know, doing everything that you can think of and tracking it and at least writing it down. So the next time you go through the process, you don't have to think about it again. You may just make refinements to what you did the first time. And you may, you know, say, that didn't work very well, I'm going to do that differently or whatever. But having a list makes it easy so that then when you start signing up for events on a regular basis, you say, yep, we've got an event coming up in 6 months, and 5 months I'm going to be doing this, 4 months I'm going to be doing this, 3 months in I'm going to be doing this, and then in the last 2 months I've got the following things planned, etc. So that by the time you reach the event, you've accomplished a lot of these things I've been talking about. So that's the key, I guess, in advanced preparation. It's not just doing all of these things, but at least having a pathway carved for your company so it's repeatable. Because if this works well, hopefully these events that you attend virtually will pay off in ways that will be much more rewarding than had you just shown up for the first time and, you know, meet everybody for the first time, which, like I said, doesn't usually generate much for business. And it's often just generates a bunch of unqualified leads that you have to chase down after the event, makes it much harder to get things to turn into something, as opposed to starting early and trying to make the conference a benchmark kind of an activity where during the activity, you know, you're putting agreements together, or at least you're finalizing things with people that you've been working with, hopefully for a few months. Just coming up on 10 after, I wonder if anybody has any questions on any of that. Okay, we're scheduled for a 15-minute break, but I'm running a little bit long, I think. So let's take 10 minutes instead. Just coming up on 3:10, let's plan to resume at 3:20. And then we'll talk about actually the event itself and follow through post-event. Sorry, just lost a menu. Just give me 1 second. Okay. With the time remaining, I guess I want to talk a few things. I want to talk about communications prior to the event, at the event, and some best practices for virtual events. Again, this is from what was gleaned from talking to companies that have been attending these events. I want to start perhaps by looking at a few basics related to communications. One is companies need to make sure they're signing up for these events early. I would say that's not typical. I've been on the organizing side of a number of events in the last 6 months, and we're seeing a lot of very last minute signups. I don't know if it's the nature of, you know, the pandemic and people's schedules, or if it's burnout from being in a lot of these events, but certainly we're seeing high rate of registrations just prior to the event. Now, that's fine if you are prepared to just show up at these events and use them for lead generation. I mean, as a company, you always have that decision to make. I would say best practice, both for physical events and virtual events, is not to use these events for just for lead generation, but instead to use them as a culmination activity that follows a lot of preparation. So that requires early sign up. Now, the good news is, I think that a lot of the organizers of these events are still running on old schedules. They're announcing early. They're, you know, saying things are normal, as normal as they can be in this environment. They are trying to keep the same kind of time frame because they're trying to keep the same audience that they've had historically. So in many cases, the announcements of these events is coming with lots of notice. The fact that a lot of people aren't signing up until the last minute is irrelevant, I guess, from your standpoint. I say best practice is to sign up early. So that's the first thing. Second thing is learning about social media groups in the markets that you're most interested in is important. Now, it may turn out that Facebook and LinkedIn and some of these other sort of platforms that were used a lot in North America are in fact appropriate for the markets that you're trying to go to. I'm just saying, don't take that for granted, and make sure that you make your presence on whatever platforms you need to be on, make it known early, because this, as you saw me describe, is a bit of a process. You have to, you're going to need to make your presence known in some of these forums indirectly to people that you're going to want to reach out to. Speaking in forums, or I shouldn't say speaking, but posting in forums, asking questions in forums, being engaged in some of these forums will be helpful to you. But in order to make that effective, you have to do it many months in advance. It's not something that you can do at the last minute and expect it to really yield anything. So this is a bit of a process. It's a place where you can identify key people that you might want to reach, but it's also a place where you can show yourself to people that you want to reach before you reach out to them. So think of it that way. I talked a lot about digital branding, and I would say that your digital footprint is important, increasingly important, and just using whatever you have on hand might not be good enough. If you're opening new markets, you need to focus and tailor things. So that's just something to do. The website review, again, this is going to take a bit of time. Figuring out whether or not you've got an adequate footprint on your website that is both customer-centric, specifically for the target markets that you're interested in, and segmented in a way that speaks to the customer's issues in the market that you're going to. And, you know, getting these things reviewed by people in the market ahead of time is not something that you turn on a dime on. These are things that, you know, you may have to hire somebody to do a review for you, a consultant, for example. Like I said, now you can get this kind of consulting input cheaply and quickly. So there's no reason that it has to take a long time, but it's not something that you can do at the last minute. So again, that's something that should be given some importance. Looking for program sessions, either where you can attend, if it's a conference kind of an event, or where you can present, or somebody who is a friend to your company can present. These represent opportunities, again, for credibility building. So the extent that you can do that, great. And certainly like pre-post event sessions that I talked about is another opportunity to build credibility. All of this is designed to position you in a way that when you actually get to the event, you're talking to somebody, the barriers are down, they know who you are, it's not a first time, nice to meet you, you know, we should consider what we might do together in the future. Hopefully you're bringing together the threads that you have sort of developed over time. I know some companies that do this, physical events for products, and they try to make sure that they've provided samples, they try to make sure they've provided quotes, they try to make sure that they've had dialogue and shared resources and shared video, and they do all of this before they ever get to a place where they're having a face-to-face in a platform like this, because they're counting on bringing a deal together or bringing a partnership together at the event. And they use the event as an important culmination activity. And by doing that, they're able to be much more successful with the events themselves. A couple of things about the events themselves. It's a good idea to have an event landing page on your own website. Now, why do I say that? If you are the person who manages the website analytics on your company's web page, you'll know that you get tracking by page, how much traffic on a given page, and you'll know that you get traffic on your home page that is sort of everybody together. But by building a single page for this event, whatever the event is, you know, www.yourwebsite.com/event number 1. By building a landing page and using that embedded link everywhere in all of the materials you share, you can make sure that all the traffic from this event, other than people who Google search you, but certainly people that are clicking on materials, links that you give them or whatever, you can make sure that all of that is tracked on a single isolated page that nobody else has. And from a tracking standpoint, kind of knowing how successful your efforts are is helpful. So it's just something to consider. It doesn't take any time to set up. If you want the people from the event who go to that page to have the full experience of your website, you can have a copy of your homepage at that link. So www.yourdomain.com may be your homepage. www.yourdomain.com/this-event-number-1 can also be a copy of your homepage that looks exactly the same with all the same menu choices and everything. So people that click the link end up going to the landing page, don't know they've been directed to a copy of your homepage. It will seem like they just landed on your website, but from a tracking standpoint, you'll have better statistics and you'll know how many actual trips were from your shared media at the event to that particular thing, or if you're speaking or whatever, but it's just better to track it on website analytics. If you don't have somebody at your company that does website analytics, somebody should be doing it. It's pretty easy. The control panel for your website usually has free website analytics that anybody who can read can interpret easily. So if you don't have someone at your company that looks at website analytics, get access to the control panel on your website, which is where your account is managed, your credit card, all that stuff. Go in there, look for the link to website statistics, and you will be able to find out, you know, how much traffic you have on your website, on what days, at what times, by who, what kind of browser they use, what countries are they from, et cetera. And all of those things can be helpful at figuring out whether or not your promotional efforts are being successful or not. A couple of just shortcuts, I guess. A lot of these new virtual event platforms have some kind of chat feature. This allows for different levels of engagement. In some cases, you walk up to a booth and you have media that you can look at, like videos. You have chat that you can use if you just want to ask some simple questions. And then you can actually ask for an appointment, or you can check in to see if there's somebody available to have a face-to-face discussion using something like we're using right now, like Zoom, which will give you direct contact with the people who are at the booth, if you want to think of it like a physical trade show booth. Now, because lots of these platforms have built-in chat, you might want to think of a frequently asked questions list ahead of the event, things that you know people are going to have questions that you get all the time. New people who are new to your company ask the same question all the time, and build out a frequently asked questions list with answers, and keep it in a Microsoft Word document so that you can copy and paste answers to chat questions easily. So when someone says, you know, hey, how much does this cost? If you have a standard way of answering that, then you just go copy paste, and you know, maybe it's a link to your website or whatever. But the point is that you don't want to have to hand type everything at the event, because usually there's a lot to do at any one of these events. If you're attending sessions, if it's a conference and there are speaking sessions, and you have a plan to make an appearance at the session, I don't mean like you know, sneak appearance. I mean, if you're going to be in a session and at the end you have plans to ask questions to give credibility to yourself, to raise profile for your company or whatever, you should have those questions prepared in advance, so you're not having to wing it. And so you can post the question in the chat as well, because usually most of these sessions have a chat space. So you can put the question in text, and you can also ask the question yourself. Think about bringing technical experts. I mentioned that already. You may want to bring a technical expert from your company for your platform, like somebody who knows IT well. Like I said, a lot of these platforms are experimental, which means that not all the bugs are worked out, which means sometimes having somebody who kind of knows how things get put together might have some ideas as to how to fix things when they're not working properly. I know most shows have somebody that troubleshoots these kinds of issues, but I'm saying in these virtual platforms, some of which have been developed in a hurry to make these happen, not everything works perfectly. And so having somebody on your IT side should be helpful. And I would say that when we're building websites these days, we have something that's called responsive design. This is why you see a lot of websites now that are very long and have like a long scroll on the main page where you can see most of the content in one scroll, because people are now doing this on their phone, they're doing it on tablets, they're doing it on laptops, they're not always working on desktops. And because of that, websites with responsive design are supposed to work on a screen of any size, which means as you resize the window that you're looking in, that the content changes accordingly and becomes user-friendly at whatever scale you choose to look at it. But think about that. That means that the view of somebody who's looking at on their old iPhone, which has a very small screen, versus somebody who's looking at it on their desktop with a huge screen, they're not going to get the same view. Now, I'm saying this because good practice is to get a phone, get a tablet, get a laptop, get a desktop, and go visit the platform with all of these devices and experience what people are going to see when they come to see you. Because these platforms, like I said, they're not all perfect, which means that the experience of somebody who's logging in on their phone might be quite different than somebody on their desktop. And you should anticipate what kind of challenges they might face. So doing this yourself is good practice. And then I'm going to add that having backup connectivity isn't easy to organize necessarily, but it's important. If you spend 6 or 7 months with a bunch of process built in as sort of sales and marketing effort to soften up and people that you're interested in talking to, and hopefully develop a little bit of a relationship with them with the idea of culminating it at this activity. And you have a power outage or a Wi-Fi outage during the activity, you're gonna feel stupid that you didn't have a backup. Now, what can you do about that? Well, sometimes you can get connectivity for your Wi-Fi through different means. You know, you may have cable, you may have cell phone possibility of connectivity, but thinking about what you're doing in the event that you have some sort of disruption, either power or Wi-Fi, you know, having a backup battery for your laptop in case your power goes down, so that you've got enough backup battery to manage to do the battery side of it. Just think about connectivity and what it involves, and whether or not a power outage or a Wi-Fi outage would throw you out of business. And if the answer is yes, it would, then think about what you might have as a backup plan to deal with that. For the people who are most important, the contacts that you've been developing some sort of dialogue with over the months leading up to the event, create some profiles of them and put it in a short document. Most of these events, like a real trade show, there will be lots of times when you need multiple people to sort of deal with people. And you could be tied up talking to somebody else that's new. When somebody you were waiting to see shows up, it's good to have sort of a hot list of the most important people that you really want to talk to at the event listed, so that if someone else runs into them and they don't find you first, that the person knows that they are high priority. So putting together a sort of list of your targets in advance and making that available to people that you're working with, if you've got multiple people at the event, is important. Sharing video, appropriate video, tailored video, video that's suitable for the target market with your contacts in advance is a good idea. Just, you know, like a short 2 or 3 minutes of something to keep you top of mind as if they're coming to the event, so they don't forget about you, is a good idea. And having some goals for the event is important as well. Putting together, you know, what is it you're trying to accomplish, so that if you've got other people involved, they know, you know, what's most important to you to make sure that it gets done. When I told you about sort of developing a digital collateral inventory and thinking about how much of it is tailored or could be tailored, it's good to have that all in one place. Even if it's not all in one place physically, but, you know, it's good to have links to everything you need, or a folder that contains a lot of your resources, a single folder, so that if you need images, if you need video, if you need whatever it is you need, you've got it ready to go. If somebody comes to the chat and wants something, you can point them to with a link, or you can send it to them as an attachment by email or whatever. But having that all in one spot is a good way to be organized if you're trying to manage a lot of contacts in a single space at a single time. And it's really good practice to schedule appointments or meetings before the event, during the event, after the event, with those people that you're trying to develop your contacts with. So rather than having them randomly find you and hoping that you're available, it's better to say, you know, on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, can you come and see me? And they'll build it into their schedule and you build it into yours. And that way you're not either distracted or involved doing something else when they show up and they want to talk to you, especially if you've spent a few months nurturing that, cultivating that relationship and hoping that you'd be available to talk to them. You don't want to be distracted when they finally do show up. I'm going to pause there and ask if anybody has any questions about any of that. Okay. Let's talk about sort of post-event. What does one of these events look like when you wrap it up? Some important things to know: that most of these new platforms have platform analytics. Now, when you register to be on a website for an event like this, they can track everything. They can track everything you do, which from an organizer standpoint and from an exhibitor standpoint, if you're on one of these platforms during one of these events, is really quite good, because you'll get copies of everything. You'll get feedback that the exhibitors have given about anything that you had to do with. You'll know what level of engagement they have, etc. So make sure you find out whether or not registration information is available, survey information is available, feedback that was given, engagement points. A lot of this is tracked by the platform and made available as part of what you pay for when you become an exhibitor. So it's good to check that out. Make sure you've got somebody who knows how to manage platform analytics on your, or website analytics on your own website, so you can track traffic to your website that's related to the event itself. These next few items, qualified prospects, significant information exchange, companies in virtual product demos, prospects agree to engage in sales process. These are all like different levels of engagement by people that you meet. So you may want to categorize this and organize them. And this is all part of the, what happens, how do I follow up? We know notoriously, historically, companies aren't very good at following up at trade shows, and I'm guilty of having done that myself. The nice thing about using the approach that I just described to you is that if you do this, there's a good chance that a lot of the follow-up you'll be doing is sort of much further down the road, not unqualified leads, but rather, close engagement of well-qualified prospects that you've now had meaningful discussions with and hopefully are taking next steps. That's easy to make as a high priority. And then with other people that maybe you did really still meet new people for the first time, which is always going to happen at these kinds of events. Try and categorize them and prioritize them in some way that allows you to have a meaningful approach to your follow-up. I just did one of these last week in another province, and somebody was saying, they were getting contacts from partner companies who are saying, well, I went to the event, I met this company, and they didn't follow up with me like they promised. And it's really frustrating me because I wanted to do something. This is a buyer. So that should never happen, but it does. But being prepared in advance for sort of a systematic way to follow up to put the shoe on the other foot, I guess. The nice thing about email is, you can do something that is close to a form letter. Nice meeting you at the event. I really appreciate our discussion about fill in the blanks, a couple of sentences that are tailored to the person. And then, here's some information that we've been providing to everyone, really hoping to hear from you on fill in the blanks. Sincerely, I look forward to hearing from you. Send, and you can do that copy, paste many times. It's much easier by email to do follow-up than it used to be, at least to get an initial response out so that people don't think that you didn't follow up at all. Now, I'm not saying send everybody a form letter. I'm saying make sure it's customized enough so that it's personalized. But if it means getting back to everybody quickly and at least getting the dialogue going, that's something that you should be able to do easily if you make it a priority. And I'm suggesting that it's important that you do. I think that's pretty much where I wanted to end up. I guess I left a little bit of time here at the end for questions, and that's pretty much all I have. So I'm going to open the floor, and I really would welcome feedback, thoughts, or comments from any of you.
Sometimes, Leroy, the facilitators do such an excellent job that you leave nothing left to dispute, debate, discuss, or elaborate on.
Well, let me say this. All of you probably, I was probably copied in the email to you, and certainly Suzanne has my email. I'll post it in the chat right now. But I certainly want to leave the door open if any of you need to reach me, or if you have specific questions about your company and you didn't want to ask them in this session, don't hesitate to contact me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I also know Suzanne mentioned that she was going to record this session, that some people who listen to this session may not be doing it live. And if that's the case and you have questions, don't hesitate to email me as well. I'm happy to to follow up with you.
Certainly, and Deanne will send out to everybody a copy of your deck, both in English and in French. I think we're in process of just doing some last minute modifications to that, but thanks, Leroy. Your email address is well noted, leroy.lowe@nscc.ca, for those of you who aren't checking in with the chat. So lots of great information was shared, Leroy. It's wonderful that there are other champions out there in the trade ecosystem that are supporting our companies to improve their capacity to do business generally, but also to do business in this new virtual trade world, whether that's through conferences or forums or our missions, or, as you said, tons of trade shows have all gone online as well, and some with some degree of success and some with some degree of failures, as I've evidenced myself. So lots and lots of lessons learned here. My big takeaway, if I will, is that preparation still remains key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so understanding your market, understanding your positioning, making sure that you put your best foot forward. And in this case, put your best virtual face forward so that you've got great materials. If somebody is walking by your booth, you know, they're no longer picking up your brochure on the table and grabbing a candy. They have to actually go into your virtual exhibit space and select the materials that they want to download and read, or put in their suitcase or briefcase, as the case may be. So that's wonderful, Leroy. I'll stop there, and I'll thank you again. We want to stay on in case there are some other comments or some last minute questions.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
We'll wish everybody a wonderful afternoon then, and we'll look forward to hosting you again in the future.
Great. Thank you.